It's your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day and a good show coming up. Chip Towers from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution joins me here in just a little while to talk about his recent piece on Gopher football being the last team to three-peat as a national champion. If you did not know that, the history goes way back. 1934, 1935, 1936. The Gophers under Bernie Bierman pulled that off. No other team has done that since then. And of course, Chip Towers' interest in that is that he covers the Georgia Bulldogs. They are trying to do it this year after winning national championships each of the last two seasons. So he'll join me to talk about his recent piece, his research into the Gophers, and what Georgia has that might be different than some of these other challengers. There's been like a dozen challengers over the years that have won two championships in a row and have come up short in trying to win a third. So that will be here in just a few minutes. At the end of the show, we'll get to some disappointing but not altogether damaging results from a few games on Tuesday night. Twins, Gopher volleyball, and Lynx fall into those categories. I'll explain why those were disappointing, but also why they might ultimately be okay in the long run. First, though, what did I miss? Trying to make sense today of Vikings cutdowns. They had to trim their roster to 53 players by 3 p.m. Tuesday, and they did some of the easiest work on Monday, releasing, I think, like 15 players ahead of the deadline, but they had a bunch of work to do on Tuesday, and I'm confused a little bit by what they're up to here. I guess my overriding sentiment is this can't be it, right? This can't be everything that they're going to do. There's got to be some other pickups, some roster balancing that's going to come about now, because right now I think Ben Gessling did a great job kind of putting this into context, in addition to our colleague and fellow Vikings writer Andrew Kramer, who had kind of the analysis position by position. But Ben put this into great context, just kind of talking about what he was seeing from this whole thing. His lead from today's story was perfect. When I saw it, I was thinking the same thing about what I saw. He said, of the players on the Vikings' initial 53-man roster for the 2023 season, 5 have carried the ball at least 10 times in an NFL season. 1 is a running back, Alexander Madison. 2, Brandon Powell and Jalen Reagor are wide receivers, and 2, Kirk Cousins and Nick Mullins are quarterbacks. Yeah, they've got 1 running back on the entire roster, Alexander Madison, who's carried the ball at least 10 times in a season. It goes on from there. 1 corner on the opening roster, that's Byron Murphy Jr., has played more than 200 defensive snaps in a single season. Yeah, there's a lot to take in there. I think the offensive line, running back, and corner are 3 areas where I would expect they are not done. There might be some more moves to come. I'm not exactly sure who that squeezes out in the end, but they have 3 true running backs. They have fullback C.J. Ham, then they also have Kene Nwangwu, who's been hurt all of the preseason, and Ty Chandler, who had his moments in the preseason, but that is it. That's what they've got at running back. I would imagine they're looking around at other teams' cuts and saying, we've got to have someone with a little bit more veteran experience, or at least ready to go when needed, because I don't think they can go into the season, especially with Madison being, not unproven in the NFL, but unproven as a starter. They're already asking him to fill into some pretty big shoes with Dalvin Cook moving on. So that's one area. You look at the offensive line, there's only 8 offensive linemen. Your swing tackle is Oli Udoh at this point. I mean, it's not great. I mean, their starting 5 are okay, and there's some continuity from last year. You've got anchors with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill at the tackles, but if you're looking again at Ed Ingram and Ezra Cleveland as your guards, and then Garrett Bradbury as the center, your line has already got some question marks, especially the interior. If you're only keeping 8 linemen and you've got some backup issues, I don't know. I think something's got to happen there. And then corner, they've got more safeties than corners. They got 6 safeties and 5 corners. I know in the Brian Flores defensive system, they're going to deploy safeties in non-traditional ways. I know they're really high on Josh Metellus, and I would be too. I think he's shown some good things, but Man, there's so much inexperience in the secondary, like Ben laid out with Byron Murphy, who's been hurt a lot in his career, by the way, being really the only experienced corner at any point that they could put out there right now. So I think there's got to be more to come. I think you look at this and you say, you applaud the decisions at a certain point because it seems like they kept the 53 guys that they thought were the best players in this moment, maybe regardless in a few cases of position. They kept a bunch of safeties. They kept 4 tight ends because they liked their tight ends. They weren't married to draft picks from the past. I think they kept 3 undrafted free agents from this year. They cut some draft picks. Like it wasn't playing favorites. It wasn't like they just are going to stick with somebody just because they drafted them. So I like that. I think maybe that was a weakness of the Rick Spielman era, that they would maybe keep guys too long because they were tied to them, because they invested in them, because their analysis, they were stubbornly believing that they were going to be proven right at some point, and then it just kept going on and on for too long. So I like what they're doing to a certain degree, but right now this roster doesn't make a ton of sense. I think there's got to be 2, 3, 4 moves before the regular season starts to make this feel like it's a more complete roster. I think the top of the roster is still pretty good, especially on offense. Of course, you got Cousins, you got Jordan Addison, you got Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson, as long as he's healthy. The ear infection, the back, the contract, whatever it is that's keeping him out for the preseason, as long as that's taken care of. The skill position is good. Defense has got a ton of questions, but still, I feel like this roster cutdown was interesting because you looked at it and you didn't feel like it was complete. And they always caution us, we're not done yet. This is the time of year, and this is the type of year, and this is the kind of staff where I actually do believe that to be true.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
It is good to be joined on Daily Delivery today by Chip Towers, longtime writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and covers Georgia football. Has covered all sorts of things there. Born and raised in Georgia. You've been there for a long time, Chip. Is that right?
Yeah. I can. Well, I've been here so long that I can remember in my lifetime Georgia's previous national championships. Now, I'm not old enough to remember Minnesota's previous national championships.
Not a lot of us are. We're fewer and far between now.
I actually tried to find somebody that had some maybe generational connection to those people in Minnesota's glorious football past, but was unsuccessful in that regard. But I have born and raised in Georgia, and you've been around the university. My grandmother worked for the university, so kind of go way back in that regard and familiar with its history. It was only since Georgia finds itself in the position that it currently is, going for an unprecedented, since Minnesota, 3rd straight national championship, that I kind of got curious and wanted to dig up the Gophers story. And thanks to you, your outlet, and many others up there in Gopher Nation, I was able to learn a lot about that. Really what's an incredible football history up there in Minnesota. And the readers down here at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution were certainly very unfamiliar with all that. So I enjoyed getting a chance to sort of tell the Gophers story to a new audience.
And right, like you said, obviously telling that story because Georgia going for a 3rd national championship this year and a good chance to do it, to be the first team since Minnesota to do it. I mean, they're number 1 almost everywhere you would look, and have what we consider probably a good path to get there. We'll get to Georgia in a minute. I want to kind of circle back to the story you wrote, kind of looking into the history of Minnesota. Like, what did you find along the way that interested you, surprised you? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people here know some of this history, but it was so long ago. It's not necessarily like it's not as common knowledge. People sometimes are taken aback when they're like, wait, like this football program that has had a lot of struggles. I mean, they're better now. They're on solid footing now. But this program that's had so many struggles in recent decades, half century, this was the last program to win 3 straight national championships in the 30s.
Yeah, and so in doing that, obviously the name that I'm sure most people at Minnesota are familiar with. Though I did find out, and The Athletic also did a story on this, and they actually came up there to the area and kind of talked to some fans that were at a scrimmage and could find very few people that were actually familiar with this history. But I would say my greatest takeaway is learning the greatness of Bernie Bierman.
Yeah.
What an incredible coach he was, and on the cutting edge of that day, running the single wing and doing a lot of stuff with an unbalanced line that was sort of new to the day. And come to find out, he was at Tulane. He was in the South. I think he had a cup of coffee at Mississippi State.
Sure.
And then goes from I think a Rose Bowl bid with Tulane. Gets hired by the Gophers, and man, what a run. I mean, certainly it's different. I mean, it doesn't take much more than looking at the pictures when you see, 16, 18 guys on the team. I mean, it was a different day. It was, one platoon football and all that kind of stuff. But winning is winning. And there were great teams in the 1930s that he was besting and won a bunch of games in a row. And I mean, it was no fluke, and that there's some asterisk involved. When you look at the 3 championships, only the 36 one, the last one, as you came in what we call the poll era,
right,
when the Associated Press started. But really, even after that, I mean, if you were Army or Notre Dame, you had a really good shot of winning it every year because that's just how the writers felt. Georgia has found itself actually their really first glorious time comes in the 1940s, and they won it in 42. They were given a credit for it, but they were undefeated in 46 and didn't get it. It went to Army or Notre Dame, the one, and there was another year that they were really, really good and they didn't get it. But Minnesota, there was no fluke about it for the most part. They were beating everybody they played. They traveled by train to play big games in the day, which was unusual. And just really did some great things back then. And then you also come to appreciate, like we've seen in so many powers, even in modern day football, how important the coaching job is, because, he goes and serves in World War II. Bierman did as a Marine. He comes back. The same things were expected. The winning at the same level they didn't. And I guess he gets let go, and kind of, I don't want to say the Gophers have been in a desert ever since, because they have had pockets of great success. But, obviously they haven't knocked on the door of a national championship, since he was there.
Right.
So anyway, I find myself, just kind of interested, and I hope the Gophers find the same. Just interested in Minnesota. I can't wait to see what they do this year. I'd love to see Georgia get them on the schedule at some point down the line. And, it was a fun story to write, kind of to learn a little bit of history and how they got to, how they got to where they were and where they are now.
Now, the Gophers fans these days probably aren't, there's no animosity, obviously, but this is a record that this program has. They're probably not hoping that Georgia does what Georgia hopes it does this year. Yeah. So I talked to a bunch of people, and of course I talked to guys that work with you and cover the team, and they're objective, of course. But I did reach out to Gopher Hole. Oh yeah.
And talk to them, and they were like, in no uncertain. No, we don't want Georgia to win. We were rooting against Alabama in 2013.
Yeah.
Which was the last team that had a legitimate chance to do it. And then Georgia this year. And as you alluded to, Georgia's got a real easy slate. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with this, but, Georgia was supposed to play Oklahoma this year.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of getting criticized nationally for their schedule. but they kind of had their biggest non-conference game yanked out from under them when Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. The SEC made them drop the non-conference game they had with Oklahoma this year because they'll be in the rotation next year. Now, I think they should have gone ahead and played it. Georgia was supposed to play in Norman in the second game of this season. Instead, they're playing Ball State. So
little different. No disrespect to Ball State, but that's a little different.
Yeah, and they're opening against Tennessee Martin this week. They have Ball State and UAB in the month of September. They have a home game against South Carolina for their SEC opener, and they don't really get a challenge until week 6 when they travel to Auburn for a road game. So it's a weird schedule this year, and it feels kind of like a red carpet has just been kicked out in front of Georgia, kind of back to the SEC championship and the college football playoff. So, they are changing at quarterback, and they've sent 25 players to the NFL draft the last 2 years. So they're a young team, but they're loaded for bear, as we say around here, in terms of the recruiting that Kirby Smart has been able to do the last few years. Georgia has not finished outside the top 5 in recruiting, and generally they've been in the top 3, if not number 1 in the national recruiting rankings. And so they have a bunch of sophomores in particular. This is a strong sophomore team made up of a bunch of 5-star prospects that are hungry to get their shot on the field and prove they can be the next in that conga line that's been going to the NFL the last couple of years.
A lot of teams, I think it was 13 teams, have had an opportunity to repeat. And just kind of reading various things about, how close, how far away they were. There's been a lot of points along the way where teams were very close, definitely during like the poll era, where even some teams that went undefeated in that third try and just didn't get it. How do you, as you kind of think about the history, that's got to be kind of interesting now. And do you feel like it's easier or harder now in in a playoff era where you can't just get voted, you've got to win your games, but if you get into at least the Final Four, there's nobody that can say you did or didn't earn this?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that because, certainly, college football is tougher now than it was in the 1930s. I think we'd all agree. It's just more complicated and, more players, more great players. Football is an incredible, sophisticated sport that's come a long way. And, among those teams that had a shot at 3, people don't realize this, but Georgia had a shot actually in the 1980s. So they won the 1980 national championship with a guy that Minnesotans should be familiar with, Herschel Walker, a freshman back. So he was a freshman. So he's coming back in 81 and 82. And Georgia was able to play for it in 82. They did not play for it in 81 in just the craziest fluke ever. They lost to Clemson in a regular season game, and Clemson ended up winning the national championship that year. And as you know, that was all the bowls. And so Georgia's opportunity got closed on them really quick. But, there were great Oklahoma teams, great Nebraska teams, great Miami teams. Certainly Southern Cal had a really good shot.
Yeah.
That's probably, you think about Alabama had a chance in 2013, and they fell victim to the kick 6.
Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then I guess it was Southern Cal had a chance in 2005, and they fell victim to a last-second play.
Vince Young, right?
Texas.
Yeah.
So it's really, really hard, obviously, and it's become Kirby Smart, Georgia's coach. He's hesitant to enter in this conversation at all, as any coach would. They don't want to talk about a three-peat and all that kind of stuff. But any football coach that's been around for a while has to be a bit of a historian. He was the defensive coordinator on that Alabama team that did not make it. And it shows that, luck is a big part of the equation to win a national championship, particularly in college football. And so I think the playoff, if you can get in it, it's like anything else. It's baseball or whatever. If you're in a playoff format, anything can happen. You never know. And I think that certainly helped Georgia. Georgia might have had a shot under Mark Richt had there been a playoff format. In fact, I'm sure they would have gotten a shot had there been a playoff format then. But now we're getting ready to expand even more. So I think it's going to give the opportunity to more teams for the chance to get hot and win one. So whether it happens again, I don't know, but Georgia certainly has the best shot in 10 years, and they have a good schedule for possibly pulling it off.
If they are going to do it this year, what will be their kind of bread and butter? What will be the thing that they ride to get to this third one?
Well, there's a quarterback change, and Georgia's story, if you're familiar with it, the quarterback situation at Georgia's been kind of crazy, and they ended up with a former walk-on named Stetson Bennett, who last time I checked is still on the roster for the Los Angeles Rams right now. He turned out to be a great player. So there's a quarterback change. Georgia has named their starter. It's a fourth-year junior by the name of Carson Beck, and they have a former five-star recruit by the name of Brock Vandergriff and another five-star recruit by the name of Gunnar Stockton behind them. So I actually think Georgia has a pretty good quarterback situation. I mean, if Carson Beck doesn't work out, they'll turn to the next guy, the next five-star, which is kind of the thing going on. They're having changes at both offensive tackle positions. Again, five-star, are stepping in to the role. And both of those, one of those guys played a lot last year. So, they got some questions at the running back position. They have 8 starters, I believe it is, returning on defense, a defense that only allowed 14.3 points a game last year. And I think that's what separated Georgia in this run. There's been great offenses. Alabama won with great offense. Clemson won with great offense. But Georgia's defense has just been unbelievable. They've had 8 first-round draft picks in the last 2 drafts, 25 picks overall, most of those guys off the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's kind of a separator for Georgia. They play great defense.
Yeah, one of those guys on the Vikings now, right? Lewis Cine. He was the last pick of the first round of the 22 draft. So he would have been on the first of the national championship teams in this run.
That's right. Yeah, he was a big part of that team. And another one of kind of what's happened with Georgia under Kirby Smart is just national recruiting. Like the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta is huge, and per capita there are more football players that come out of the state of Georgia and play Division I football. Talking about per capita, even than California, Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and all the things. So that Georgia's always made a good living in its home state, but Kirby Smart has taken it to a different level, recruiting players out of the north of Philadelphia, in particular, Pennsylvania, and they have Brock Bowers, who's from Napa Valley, California. They had Darnell Washington last year, from Las Vegas. They're recruiting nationally now, and that's what's got them going toe-to-toe with Alabama and Ohio State every year.
We talk here plenty about transfer portal because I think some of those kind of, teams that want to rise up or maybe don't have that kind of 5-star classes every year need to supplement. I'm curious, what's the impact of the portal been at a program like Georgia in the last few years?
Well, amazingly, Georgia took 0 players out of the portal last year, and they took 3 this year. Well, 4 if you count one that's a walk-on that came from Tennessee. The portal to me, and it's an issue overall, is a place where the rich go to get richer, right?
Yeah.
It's a free waiver wire, and in fact, I've been talking about Georgia has some depth issues in their offensive backfield, and you're kind of like, why didn't they go grab a guy out of the portal to play running back for them? But Georgia, brings in 4. 2 of those guys are going to start for them this year. One of them was the leading receiver. They got the leading receivers off of Mississippi State in Missouri, and the guy Dominic Lovett, who's coming to Georgia from Missouri is going to start for them in the slot. So he's making immediate impact. The other side of it is, this has been not written about all that much. Georgia sent 14 players into the this past year. And a lot of those guys, those guys went to Alabama, Nebraska, a lot of those guys are going to start there. And they left because they weren't going to start at Georgia. Bear Alexander to Southern Cal. So it's kind of like, Georgia can sort of unload some dead weight there as well. And this happens at certain programs. Certainly Alabama has been able to take advantage of it that way. Texas, Ohio State, Michigan are able to use the portal the same way. And for that reason, I think a lot of times the rich get richer out of it.
Yeah. A couple more things for you, Chip Towers. Really enjoying this conversation, a chance to talk not just current Georgia football, but just the history of all this. Maybe kind of going back to the story you wrote, was there anything that surprised you at all? I'm sure it's kind of a new subject to you, but was there anything that you were just like, wow, like I didn't know that, but that's wild, and that was completely unexpected to me.
Well, certainly I was unaware until this entire thing happened of, where Minnesota was as a program for many years under Bernie Bierman. But, also, I learned a little bit about the current Minnesota program. I think they got good things going on there. I guess, what was it, just 2019 or so? Minnesota has been playing in some major bowls. Yep. I'd love to hear from you what the general outlook is for this season. I probably didn't drill down enough on that. And the craziness of what's going on in the Big Ten right now, and conference and realignment. I can't imagine, Minnesota's basketball team and softball teams and things like that having to travel to the West Coast to play games. I think that's crazy where we are in college athletics in general, but football in particular. I love Tubby Smith. Tubby Smith had a cup of coffee here at the university. He coached Georgia for 2 years, and I watched with interest when he went there and coached that great basketball program in Minnesota. So a lot of things. I can't wait to get up there again. It's been many, many years since I visited the land of 10,000 lakes, and as it's been 100 degrees down here for most of the last week, I wouldn't mind coming there pretty soon, to be quite honest with you.
Don't come here too soon. It's supposed to be like almost 100 here on Labor Day, but yeah, it's I'm sure it's different. It cuts different because we get maybe 3 or 4 of those a year, and you get a lot more of those. What's funny is you're talking about realignment in the Big Ten. Is like the SEC. I think I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago when we found out the news of those 2 other West teams joining the Big Ten. Like the SEC is really the only of the power conferences now that makes any sense geographically and makes any sense like name wise. It's South and East, and it doesn't doesn't tell you how many teams are in it. It's not like the Big Ten now with 18. It's not like the Big 12 with 14 or the poor Pac-12 with 4 and soon to be 0 probably. It actually makes sense. Or the ACC might have West Coast teams in it now. Like the SEC at least still makes sense to me. And you were asking me about the Gopher football team this year. I think they're in an interesting spot where they've had Tanner Morgan, this quarterback, for as long as PJ Fleck's essentially been here. And with the COVID years of eligibility and stuff like that. So they're turning things over to a younger quarterback now this year, Ethan Kalikmanis, and they are projected to maybe throw the ball a little bit more this year. Each of the last 3 full seasons, they've won 9 games or more. You alluded to the 2019 season when they won 11. They were in a hunt for a Big Ten title that year. So I think this is a kind of an important year for maintaining a certain water level, even as you're maybe rebuilding a little bit, because the really good programs don't drop too far, even when they're maybe not at their peak.
Yeah, the new word that I've learned through this conference realignment thing is contiguous. That's Greg Saint, the SEC commissioner, is so proud to spout that word at every opportunity that, hey, here at the SEC, we remain a contiguous conference because all the states are touching each other that as opposed to having to take jets for everything. But it's still a long way, to College Station, Texas from Athens, Georgia. I can tell you that. And it's crazy what we're going through. I do think if expansion continues in the SEC, that Virginia and North Carolina, two more contiguous states, would be the ones that the SEC most look for. People tend to spout about Clemson and Florida State, but the SEC already has representatives from those states. And really, at this point, it's more about TV markets than it is about, the pedigree of your athletic program. And so I think Virginia and North Carolina are certainly on the SEC's radar. But it's crazy times that we live in between NIL, the transfer portal, and conference realignment. And sometimes I don't feel too bad about being pretty close to retirement.
Well, these are only things they could have never in their wildest dreams imagined 85, 90 years ago when the Gophers were the last team to three-peat. I think Georgia's got a great chance this year. We'll see how the year plays out. It's going to be hard for them to miss the playoff at the very least. And once you get in, like you said, there's the kind of anything can happen, but that once you get there, you're 2 games away from doing it, and you're not at the whims of a voter deciding, hey, I'm tired of this team being the champion and things like that. So I think there's a good chance for it this year.
Yeah, I think there's a really good shot at it. And if it happens, I'll be calling you, and I'll be calling, all those folks up there in Minnesota that I talked to for this story. And, again, everybody there was so kind and generous, to take my calls and kind of have fun with the story. And I appreciate you calling attention to it.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of kind and generous, appreciate your time as well. Go back to all the stuff you've got up in the run-up to the season. Chip Towers from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Appreciate the time, and we'll hopefully talk to you down the road.
Absolutely. Take care.
Just to follow up on that, too, ESPN had a good piece just kind of detailing all of the teams that have tried and failed to win 3 in a row since the Gophers did. I'll probably write about that a little bit more on Wednesday as well, so check for that on StarTribune.com. Some real close calls, some really good teams like Chip Towers and I talked about that didn't quite get it done. And it's just kind of crazy to think that 87 years ago, I guess it was, the Gophers were the last team to three-peat. Georgia might do it this year. We'll see. A lot to happen between now and 4 months from now when a champion is crowned. But they are looking pretty good on paper right now. We'll see if the Gophers' place in history still stands or if Georgia comes and takes their place. Let us finish with the cooler, like I alluded to at the beginning of the show. Some not so great results on Tuesday night. It was one of those nights. Twins lose to the Guardians. Gopher volleyball loses to Texas, and the Lynx fall to the Mystics. 3 outcomes that obviously did not go their way. Twins had a chance to move 8 games up in the AL Central. Instead, that's 6. Not the end of the world, though. If they can get the last game of the series, this matinee today, I believe that Sonny Gray is supposed to be pitching. If he comes out and does a good job, if they get that one, get the lead back up to 7, then there's just 3 left with Cleveland this year. They would have to be feeling pretty good about themselves. Even if they lost today, I still feel like they'd be feeling okay about themselves, but a win today puts them in pretty good shape. Gopher volleyball, of course, they wanted to beat Texas. Texas was number 1 earlier in the year before an upset at the beginning of the year, dropped them a little bit in the standings, but that's, early in the year, Gopher volleyball, I don't worry about that too much. They're trying to get themselves sorted out. New head coach, Keegan Cook. It is what matters most in October and November rather than late August that really matters to form opinions about that team. The Lynx took some hits there in the playoff race with that loss on Tuesday. They are still almost a lock, though, to make the WNBA playoffs, and 4 very winnable games here down the stretch to conclude the regular season. If they can get a couple of them, 3 of them, maybe they can get a favorable seed, get up into that top 5, at least avoid those 3 really good teams at the top of the WNBA, maybe get themselves a chance to advance in the WNBA playoffs. So a disappointing result, but all 3 of those teams still plenty to go the rest of this season. That'll do it for me today. Good stuff coming up on Thursday's show. Expecting to be joined by Bill Guerin, Wild General Manager. He will be speaking to me out at the fair right around noon today. Come check that out. If you were at the State Fair, come to the Star Tribune stage. I will be interviewing Bill Guerin live. We'll be using that later on Thursday's podcast. So if you miss it, you can hear it on Thursday. Hey, maybe listen to it both places. No crime in doing that. But anyway, Bill Guerin will be my guest Thursday. Bobby Nightingale covers the Twins, or the Star Tribune will be my guest on Friday. So good stuff coming up the rest of the week. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Back at it again tomorrow.